Hello, and welcome to Hey Boomer. This is the show for those of us who believe that we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And hope you had a good weekend. My weekend was busy. I saw a parade for the St. Patrick's Day parade a week early. I went to a movie festival. I went to a show called Big River, which was a great show about Huckleberry Finn and Joe. So if you ever get a chance to see it, highly recommend it. But today we are going to talk with Kathi Kulesza. And Kathi has over 30 years of progressive experience in the hospitality industry, and she pulls from this experience in her work as a keynote speaker and consultant to help supervisors become better listeners, become more human-centered, and as a result, they become better leaders. Our topic today is multi-generational work environment. The ideas we will discuss today will apply not only in the work environment, but also to you who may be volunteering or mentoring, or even just showing up as a parent or a grandparent in your family. Understanding how different generations approach the world and see the world and think about the world, all of those impact how we interact. So Kathi and I are going to discuss some of that today. And we are going to learn about ways to better communicate with the different generations and understand their perspectives. But before I bring them on, I always like to remind you to thank our sponsor, Road Scholar. Road Scholar is the leading expert, nonprofit expert in educational travel for those 50 and beyond, and for grandparent trips. And they travel to all 50 states, as well as over 100 countries. And it is one of my favorite ways to travel. I have taken several grandparent trips. I have taken several just Road Scholar adult trips. I have 2 more scheduled this summer. So check out their sponsor link at roadscholar.org/heyboomer. The next time you think about taking a trip, check out Road Scholar first. I also want to tell you about a couple of free takeaways that I think are super important. One would be the vitality assessment. The vitality assessment will give you some insight into whether you are fully vitalized, whether you have sustained energy, if your tank is half empty, or if it's time to really look at your life and say, maybe I need to make some changes here. It's free to download. Just go to heyboomer.biz and click on the vitality assessment link, and you will receive the vitality assessment in your email. You can also schedule a 20-minute session for complimentary coaching with me. And this also will give you some insights. You really will come away from that 20 minutes with some aha moments just because we talked. But I also wanted to let you know that this April, I am launching 2 new Hey Boomer, What's Next group coaching programs. And the first one will start on Saturday, April the 15th, and that will meet from 9:30 to 11, and that goes for 6 weeks. The next one will start on Thursday, April 20th, and that will meet from 5 to 6:30. And I'm trying the 2 different times to see what might work better for those of you that would be interested in making a plan, coming out of 6 weeks with a plan for what the next 6 months to a year is going to look like as you transition from full-time work to whatever is next for you. So you can go to heyboomer.biz/coaching and just click on the link to schedule a 20-minute complimentary session, and let's talk about what would make you feel better in this next chapter of your life. So Kathi Kulesza learned the hard way that to be a successful leader, you must be a confident leader. As I said, she spent 3 decades in the hospitality industry, moving up the ranks in management, training, customer service, loyalty, marketing, and executive leadership. Now she spends her days inspiring her clients and audiences to get out of their own way and lead without apologizing. Kathi has shared these life-changing lessons with more than 20,000 up-and-coming leaders at 600 plus in-person and virtual events. And when she's not on an airplane or in front of an audience, Kathi enjoys spending time with her family, especially her nieces, taking walks with her furry little friend Sissy, and catching up with friends and family. And she is happy to do it all in her hometown of Las Vegas. So let me bring Kathi on so y'all can meet her. Hey, Kathi.
Hello. I'm so glad to be here with you, Wendy.
I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Thank you. So let's get started. And one of the things I wanted to start with, Kathi, is a little bit out of the business world. So when we talked the first time, you mentioned being the oldest child and having, older parents and much younger siblings, and how your leadership lessons that you've learned is helping you communicate across those generations. So I'm curious what you have learned that is helping you in the family situation.
Yeah, it's something I've said quite a bit because my mother is 81 and has no short-term memory. So it's put us. The oldest of 6, and it's had to put us in these situations where we're communicating probably more meaningfully than we have in years, right? Because you think about family events, you get together, you get updates on your career, the kids, all the thing. But now we're talking about some really important topics related to my mother, the financial situation, her health, whether she stays in her home or not. And I've said many times that this being the oldest child and the conversations we're having right now has tested everything I've learned about leadership over the last 4 or 5 decades, because it's when you're communicating with family, it really strikes home how important it is to try to get it right, because anybody that's going through this, you already know, there's a lot of stress around decisions made about your parent, and each person has their own ideas of what should be done, how we should be doing it. Not everybody has the same skill sets, as far as emotional intelligence and communication skills. So it's definitely, I'm glad that I've had the experience I've had in my life, because I'm using everything I've ever learned to be, a good sister, a good daughter, and try to be, I feel like the pressure of being the oldest child to be, a really good role model. But I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not perfect because it's a very emotional topic, right? I mean,
It's a difficult topic.
Yeah, and we don't all agree on
Right.
everything. So, I have sisters. So there's 6 of us. I have sisters who are 18 years younger than me. So, I mean, there's different generations involved, and even their children who are, 10, 10, 11 years old, they're in, listening and watching and observing. And then we've got, a couple nephews that are 26, 21. So, I mean, it's several different generations involved in this. And I think for me, it's been, a big center of what I'm dealing with right now, what we're dealing with. And I feel like we weren't prepared for our aging parents, because nobody talks about it until you're in it, right? And this is probably one of the biggest challenges of the boomers and the Gen Xers right now. And I hope we get it right so future generations know what to do with us. Because
and that is something we have talked about on the show before, about how to have those conversations with your parents while they're still able to have the conversations with you, which is ideally the time. But that's wonderful that your leadership experience is helping you kind of be a leader in the family right now, which is a lot of pressure. You're right.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say that as boomer women, so I was in the tech field and
Mhm.
you were in the hospitality industry, both fairly male dominated
Mhm.
industries, right?
Yeah.
And so we learned to kind of fit in, to not be too outspoken, because otherwise you were labeled, as a bitch or too aggressive or whatever. And I'm curious now, from what you're seeing, Kathi, in the workplace, are younger women, are they taking on those same kinds of outlooks on how they should work in the workplace, or are they feeling more self-confident in themselves than we did back
So I
in the
think
day?
the much younger, so probably more millennial women from what I've seen. And I hate to put people into categories because the reality is we are a blend of all the different influences we have around us. So I think one thing we should never do is just categorize or generalize. But I would say from what I've seen from younger women, they're more likely to be a little bit more assertive, more likely to apply for jobs that they're not as ready for, like where we would always have to be 100% ready. I think they're more comfortable being themselves and being visible, or more visible than we were. But you're right. Like I think we talked about this. Like I was in a room typically. When I was a general manager. I remember I would go to these general manager meetings, and for every 10 general managers, 2 of us were women. And I had the blue suit, the black suit, the solid colored shirt, and I would put a little one of those square little scarves on that kind of looked like a tie. And and back then, and it's funny because I tell my sisters about this, like in the 80s, women had to wear skirts or dresses. Like pants were not even allowed. The dress code was you had to wear dresses or skirts, and you had to wear nylons.
That's
So
right. And
yeah,
mostly business suits. Yeah.
yeah. So business suits, and yeah, and so so I did try to blend in, but I've also had women tell me that their go-to method is they try to blend in. And I think we have to stop doing that. It worked for our generation. And I think it was almost necessary for survival for our generation because it was so male dominated, and all the bosses were men. I've only worked for 2 women in my entire career. I've had amazing male mentors, but I think today we are at a point where women, it's more acceptable and more expected that women do speak up and stand out and pull from their personalities and allow themselves, give themselves permission to be who they are. But yeah, big differences. But I think the younger women are going to help us, expand a little bit more when it comes to our personalities and our uniqueness.
So in the work environment, though, if older women learn from the younger women to be more outspoken, to assert ourselves, do you think that's perceived in a positive way now?
Uh, so I actually think that, so I'm 61, right? So I think being assertive is a learned skill. And this is my opinion. You know what opinions are like? They're like elbows. Everybody has at least 2 of them. Uh, you know, uh, we learn communication skills from the people around us. So I learned how to be passive from my mother, and I
Mhm.
learned how to be aggressive from my father, and I learned how to be assertive on the job training. And I believe that the one thing that the more seasoned, and that's my, if you're younger listening to Hey Boomer, don't call us older, call us seasoned, because it'll change your perspective of us. But I think the women that are in our age group probably have learned to be assertive, and if they haven't, they should definitely take some lessons from the younger generations. I know I learned it because I had to. In order for me to grow and move into other positions, I had to learn how to be assertive, because without being assertive, you're not speaking up. And if you're not heard, you're not seen. And then if you're not visible, it's hard to get the next position. But I think women who are in our generation who have not learned how to do that, that should be your priority. And if you have to learn from somebody who's younger than you, why not do that? Because you have
Yeah.
plenty to offer them. You have plenty to share with them. You're a seasoned professional, and you can trade some of the skills you have for some of the skills that they're learning at a younger age.
Which ties me into what I wanted to talk about next, because you mentioned you had plenty of male
Mhm.
mentors, good mentors. Are you seeing like reverse mentoring, where women in our boomer age group are mentoring young people in, say, the political realities of a work environment, and the young women are mentoring the more seasoned or older women in the technology and assertiveness and those kinds of things.
So I think we have a lot of work to do in this area because there still is a lot of comments made when, in the environments that I'm in, which I do a lot of teaching, right? A lot of courses and coursework. And I hear a lot of complaints from the younger generations about the older people that work for them and how difficult they are to manage. And I hear a lot of complaints from us more seasoned individuals. Mostly, we don't complain about Gen X. Typically, people complain about millennials, right? And I think there's a lot of work to be done in being more open-minded and more curious about the other generations. So I believe the boomers, and it's kind of like the Gen X, they seem to be a little bit more flexible, right? They can flex and relate better to boomers. They can flex and relate better to the millennials. It's the boomers and the millennials where there seems to be more tension. So I think the boomers have an opportunity to be more curious and step away from the idea that the way we do things, the way we look at the world is the only way, because the world is changing and we're not going to stop it, right?
Right.
And when you complain about a millennial, now I'm not a parent, I'm a dog parent. I have not birthed any children, but there's a good chance if you're a boomer, you may have birthed a millennial. So you are responsible for this generation because you brought them into the world. And for the millennials, like my greatest advice to them is that same thing, just looking at it from a different place, is let's not look at the boomers as older, because that word alone basically has the connotation that they don't have as much use, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're almost
Mm-hmm.
expired. But if you look at the boomers and the people that are older than you as seasoned, that completely changes your picture of who that person is. Seasoning means that they've got experience, they can still contribute. So your approach to them alone is going to be different because you're looking at them as somebody that you can still learn from. And I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah.
one of the lessons I learned a long time ago, is that when I was younger, is my willingness to learn from my staff and my people when I was young was one of the greatest gifts I could give them, because it showed that I respected them and their knowledge. Because as a boss, I never really had all the answers. I just learned how to work with people and relate with people. And oftentimes I had people working for me that were much smarter than me, or they had
Mm-hmm.
expertise that I did not have, because it's like a puzzle, right? When you're a leader, you're trying to put the pieces together so that you put people around you that make you better because they have skills that you don't have,
Right,
right? And so
right.
both generations can do that, but they have to be curious and willing to learn about the other person and try not to. And that's where it goes back to, don't categorize that person. Don't look at somebody who's, like, so I'm a young boomer, right? I'm at the cusp, 61. Don't look at people that are 60 and think, oh, they're washed up, dried up, because they're not. This is like, I think, one of the greatest decades and one of the greatest sources of people that we can put into the workforce, because they're going to
Mm-hmm.
be loyal, they're going to be hard workers. They don't necessarily need to be the boss anymore, but they're less likely to probably quit jobs because they have that loyalty mindset. And if you can find a place for them and develop a relationship with them, which is a core thing when you're hiring people, then you can have that person working for you probably for another 10 or 15 years, because we're not done, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. We're not done. But you know what? You hear so much, Kathy, about the ageism when
Hmm.
people are looking for
Hmm.
jobs again, and they go in and they're 65, even 70, they've got the gray hair,
Yeah.
and the managers, the hiring managers are the millennials,
Hmm.
the 30s to 40-year-olds, and they look at that and they get intimidated, or they feel like they're washed up, like you
Hmm.
said. Um, how do you coach your clients on those kinds of issues?
Well, I think that the biggest advice I give to everybody, and sorry, that's Sissy. She has a strong opinion about this because she's 7.5. So she's,
So she's 49 in human years.
yeah, so she's up there, in human years. So she's definitely feeling the pain of not being younger anymore. My advice to everyone is treat each person as an individual, get to know them, because, each person is very different. So it's funny when I think about boomers and then I look at the description of what like a Gen X is, I'm really on that cusp because and you're very high tech also. Like we're very high tech baby boomers. Most of my friends, they would have struggle getting onto a Zoom call. They certainly wouldn't be able to put people into a breakout room. They may not be able to get onto cameras, and they're the people I went to college with, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's like you're right now, people are struggling hiring employees, right? There's maybe the great resignation, which has always been around. It's not like this is not a new problem. People have always like silently resigned from jobs and quiet quitting. It's always been going on. We've just given it a name now. The struggles we're having right now in the workforce have always been around. It's just looked differently. There has always been a challenge to find good people. It maybe is a little bit more of a struggle now because of the pandemic kind of had people hit a reset button and rethink what they want to do in their lives. So, unless you have a plethora of qualified people walking through your front door or coming through your application process, you should be open to all people that are applying for jobs. And this happens, it doesn't happen just to age, it happens to nationality, right? Last names are something people have an unconscious bias towards too. They don't even realize they're doing it, but they're judging people based on their gender, their nationality or their diversity, their age. And as a hiring person, you want to do the best you can to not prejudge anything about that person, age, gender, or diversity, because you need access to every potential candidate as possible. So I think it's, learn how to be a good interviewer, right? Learn how to do behavioral interviewing, get to know that person as a human, as a person, as a leader in that job you're filling, and be open. Because, and the interesting thing too, is that they might be looking at boomers as, well, they're only going to be able to work like another 5 years. Well, guess what we know about millennials? They only like
what do we know about millennials? Tell me.
Well, they like to stay in jobs only, like people say, 18 months. So
Right.
we already know millennials like a lot of fast-paced change. They're probably about an 18-month to 2-year in a position. Well, if that's a concern for you with baby boomers, well, guess what? Your own generation is doing that same thing. So why not give boomers a chance for 1 or 2 years to contribute? And they bring this, they're seasoned professionals. They're most likely probably more emotionally balanced. They've got more work experience. So they might be able to do a few more tasks, a few more jobs within your organization because they've already been there and done that. And if they only want to work 2 more years, who cares? That's what millennials are doing also. So give them a chance, So I don't know. I think it's really, but you know what? Here's the thing. We can't change people's mindsets, right? They have to be willing to look at their problems in a different way and be open to different solutions. And so that, that takes curiosity. It takes being open-minded. It takes stepping back and maybe taking a 5,000-foot view of your situation and taking yourself out of the day-to-day and rethinking the decisions you're making and how you're looking at potential candidates, and just being open-minded that the answers may not be the obvious answers that you always found in the past. And that just look at each person as an individual and don't judge them based on all the things we typically judge people on, which age is one of it.
Right. Yeah. And that's lovely. And that's what they try and teach in the diversity, equity, and inclusion courses. And, hopefully some of it sticks. But let's do a couple of scenarios. Okay. So I'm a manager. I'm 69 and I have some Zoomers working for me, like sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they call in sick when they're not really sick. When they're there, they do a good job, but they also have a very entrepreneurial mindset, like they want to do it their way.
Yeah.
So what's the best approach for me to manage Zoomers or young millennials in that kind of situation?
Yeah. So first of all, one thing we know about the younger generations is that their work needs to have meaning. So we want to make sure they know that they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. And it could even be making sure your organization contributes to something outside. So if you're not already doing work that's good for the community, is how do you tie your organization to doing good in the world? Because they like, especially the Gen Z, they are kind of going back to some more of the traditional values of being good citizens, of they're less likely to be the partiers that some of the older generations are. They're bringing back some of those traditional values. The other thing about the entrepreneurial spirit is, so think about, what does an entrepreneur need to know how to do, right? What skills are they going to need if they really are going to go out and strike out on their own? How about you teach them business skills that will help them be an entrepreneur? Instead of resisting it, why don't you lean into it and say, okay, you want to be an entrepreneur. What's your goal? When do you want to have your own business? 2 or 3 years. Well, let's give you some responsibilities that's going to build your business skills so that you can run a successful business when you're ready to invest in one, and lean into what their priorities are in their life instead of resisting it. And who knows, you might actually develop, a Gen Z who continues to contribute that entrepreneurial spirit as they learn how hard it is to have your own business, the money it takes if you want to have a franchise or whatever it is they're thinking. They might stick around an extra year or two because now they're being developed and they're working for an organization that does good work or contributes to the community around them. The future of the Gen Zs is not written, right?
Right. Right.
It's
It's
just,
pretty.
yeah, we don't know where they're going to end up in 3 years or 4 years, right? But
Yeah.
so let's
Yeah.
not just say, okay, they're going to work for a year and quit and go do their own thing. We don't know that, right? So,
Oh, and by giving them those kinds of opportunities, Kathy, we're probably building more loyalty in them as
mhm,
well,
yeah,
and they feel respected, which I think is really important
yeah, yeah,
to the younger generations.
yeah,
Yeah, good points. So let's flip it now.
mhm,
Okay, so I'm a boomer. I'm 69. I'm starting this new job. My boss is 40,
mhm,
right? And you know, I mean, I'm glad that I'm working and feeling like I'm contributing, but sometimes I just think that they're either micromanaging me or they don't
mhm,
get it. And I'm not sure how to approach them without
mhm,
making them feel intimidated or
yeah.
uncomfortable. What's your advice on that?
Well, so this is the hardest part for anyone that wants to communicate with the boss. So I think first of all, you have to make a decision of, and so one of my favorite books is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. So you have to make a decision on whether or not you want to try to fix it or not, right? Because fixing it means you have to be open to having a conversation with them that is respectful and assertive, and you run the risk of getting some resistance, right? So you have to really think through, okay, what do I want? And do I want to do the work to develop a relationship with this person who's a younger, and I think about myself when I was in my 40s, I was pretty well established. I was knowledgeable. So think about where you were in your 40s. You worked your butt off. You have
Mhm.
accepted the fact that this is work, right? It's not as glamorous as you thought it was going to be. You've got responsibilities, you've got bills to pay, you've got demands pulling at you. Put yourself in their shoes and think, okay, do I want to do the work to develop a better relationship, or can I accept the situation as it is? Right? Accept it for what it is. And so if you decide you want to do the work to have those communications, then you've got to pull from every book that you've read about being assertive in communication, and talk to that person. And the best approach, it's so simple, is instead of telling them what they're doing, like using you language, like you micromanage me, you're always checking in on me, you're hovering, you're like a helicopter boss. Instead, you just say, hey, I wanted to share with you. I just saw Nona. You're 61. Yes, Nona. Is you want to say, look, here's how I want to share with you how I work best. And I want to share with you how I'm feeling, in this job, because I still feel vital and I still want to contribute and I want to make you look better as a boss. And
Mhm.
so here's how I can do that best. If you're able to give me a little autonomy, and we can set up maybe a regular schedule of check-ins so you feel comfortable that I'm doing what you need me to do. I know that with a little autonomy, I can be much more productive. And I want to be able to develop a relationship with you where you can trust me to do the work and you don't have to feel like you're checking in on me all the time. So you do it from I language and you tell them how you best work. and how they can, but here's the other thing is, if you aren't committed to making them look good, then you should just accept the job for what it is and try not to, because you have to be authentically, you have to want to make them successful as your boss, because now you're the employee, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. So, and that's part of, and I think that's what boomers we can bring, because we came up with the generation of the boss is the boss. You do what the boss said because the boss is the boss. Now we've evolved, but the reality is that idea that we had, like my first job was August 18th, 1978, is, the boss is the boss and they're in charge. If you can take that part of who we were and, then and be willing to make your boss successful and help them know how you can make them more successful, you can find a good relationship with them. But you have to be not lectury, not judgy, because they're already thinking you're like that with them. So you have to raise
Right.
that idea, right? Because they already think, oh, this person, it's intimidating because they've got all this life experience and, they could probably do this job better than me. So think about what they're thinking about you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really good advice, I think. And you're right. I mean, if once you're not the boss, to try to make your boss look good, that's what you wanted your employees to do
Mm-hmm.
for you,
Yeah.
right? If you had an employee that was antagonizing you and trying to undermine you, that never worked.
No.
Nona made a comment here, which I think is great. She says her publisher said, "Are you open to feedback?"
Mm-hmm.
That could be another way to approach.
Yeah.
And I think, though, you have to be careful with that, in that you're not coming in as the parent
Right.
or the older and
Right.
wiser. You're saying feedback so that I can be a better
Yes.
employee.
Yeah. So it's about, and when you use language like, I noticed, I observed, I would probably stay away from the word concerned if you're not the boss. I overheard, I'm feeling. So now when you use I language, you are opening it up for two-way conversation. When you say you did this or you're doing that or you're acting as if, that is more of an aggressive approach. And what
Mhm.
that does is it basically will close down the communication, because now the person is going to get defensive because it sounds like you're blaming them. So when you use
Mhm.
I language, you're opening it up for like welcoming. And it's a great way to do it is to say, I'm feeling, you could say something like this. If you feel like you're being micromanaged, instead of saying micromanage, you could say, I'm feeling as though you may not trust me because of the amount of times that you're checking in on my work. Are you feeling as if you can't trust me? Because that's what I'm feeling like, that you can't trust me. So now you're telling them what you're feeling, but you're not telling them it's because of their fault. You're just asking a question. And then that gives them an opportunity to say, oh, no, I totally trust you. Because that person just may not have learned to let go yet, right? They may
Mhm.
not have learned to fully
Right.
delegate. It may be a skill they don't have yet. So you give them an opportunity to learn about how you feel about their management style. And it may open them up to considering different ideas or different approaches.
Yeah. Yeah. Good advice. So in your talks, Kathy, you have a topic called apology-free leadership.
Mhm.
What do you mean by that?
So originally, I was thinking about us women, because we show up and we hesitate to get involved in conversations, and this is our generation, like you walk into, there's 10 people having conversation and two of them are women and eight of them are men, and it's intimidating. And it's like, oh, excuse me, I had an idea. Or you'll go up to somebody and ask them to do something, I'm really sorry to ask you for this, da da da. Or somebody will say, hey, you did a really good job on that. And you'll be like, oh, that project, it was no big deal. And the best analogy I have for this is when they say, hey, I really love your outfit. And you're like, oh, this old thing, I got it at Ross for $10. So it's like we hesitate to take credit for the hard work that we do. We brush it off. We kind of apologize or give disclaimers when we want to give our input. And one piece of advice I have when you're getting credit or somebody's complimenting you is that person is taking the time to recognize and acknowledge your work. And when you tell them, oh, that project, not a big deal, you're basically dismissing their recognition of you, and you're telling them almost like they're wrong. And really,
Mm-hmm.
the best thing you could do is say to that person, thank you so much for acknowledging that work, because you know what? It was a lot of work. And I'm so grateful that you noticed, because I did put a lot into that and I'm proud of what I did. But I
Mm-hmm.
think as women, we sometimes see pride as arrogance, but it's not. Pride is just pride, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pride is just, just being okay with the fact that we work our butts off and we contribute. Now, what I found is that apology-free leadership actually does make sense for men and women. And so, although it was kind of the birth of it was this idea of how women sometimes show up apologizing for our presence. Really, what it's about now today is, as a leader, if you develop good quality, trusting, and respectful relationships with your team, with your direct reports, with your peers, when the chips are down and you need to like bark an order out or ask somebody to do something, and there's no time to discuss the why, but they know, because you have this relationship with them, that they will follow you off the edge of a cliff. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to apologize asking somebody to do something, because they trust you, and they know if you're asking, that you're asking for a reason. And they are not as like not as likely to be like, oh gosh, here she goes again, because they
Right.
trust you, and they know, if you're having a bad moment, that overall, most of the time, you're a really great boss. So it just gives you a little bit more space to have a bad day, or to be able to give an order or ask something of somebody when there is no time to explain it all. And they'll just do it because of that relationship you have with them. So apology free leadership is leading in a way that you don't have to apologize every time you ask somebody to do something, or, they know that normally you're a really great boss, and today you must have like had some bad traffic, or you spilt your coffee on your lap, and, overall you're a great person. So it's not having to
So,
apologize every time.
so would you apologize after that though? I had a bad
Yeah.
day. I yelled at you. Da, da, da. It's not
No.
ever apologizing.
No. And actually, one of the most powerful things we can do, and I don't remember what decade I learned this in, but it's like a superpower, it's like a magic wand, is when you actually admit when you screwed up to somebody, and you say, look, and this is something also I think I learned from Stephen Covey, is the willingness to accept responsibility for your actions. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually you want to control your response to things, but let's be honest, you didn't eat breakfast. Traffic was bad. You're late for a meeting. You walk in the door, and I was in hospitality. You get a guest complaint the second you walk in the door. 3 people called out sick, and you don't feel well,
Right.
So, I mean, not everything's always great. And so you're having a bad day, and you do treat somebody in a way that, you didn't control your response to a situation. It was like the last, the straw that broke the camel's back. The ability and willingness to go to that person and say, you know what, I'm so sorry. I know I was short with you earlier. Well, I should not have treated you like that, and I really apologize. You deserve better. That is like magic, but not
Yeah.
everybody's willing to do that, right? But if you're willing to do that, it can really be the solution to having those trusting relationships, because now the person knows that you don't really mean to do that. It's just, I had a bad morning, and I'm sorry you got my wrath, and that wasn't fair, and
Yeah.
please forgive me for that. So yeah, you still need to apologize. It doesn't mean you don't apologize. It just means that more times than not, you can lead without having to ask permission or apologize for giving somebody some crappy piece of work to do, and because you're leading with strong relationships and with integrity, and you're
Yeah.
somebody that people trust.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. So, takeaways. We've talked about like intergenerational, we've talked about being a leader, we've talked about leading both ways. What would be 2 or 3 takeaways that you would like to leave the audience with today, working from boomers to zoomers?
So I think, and I learned this from my nieces, is when you look at children, they look at the world through lenses that have no preconceived ideas. They are just curious about everything. And at, the age of 61, I know a lot. And sometimes I look at the lenses that I have created through a lifetime of experiences. But when I sit with them, like they just see the world all as new. right? So if you can try to take off your lenses, right, and look at the world through that lens of curiosity, and don't assume you know why something's happening, but start to ask, you know, what's going on here, you know, and instead of judging the person, think the question you want to ask is, what's happening with that person right now that this is how they're showing up? And if you're a leader, your responsibility is to help put them in a position where they can contribute more greatly and they can be more successful. And, you know, as a leader, if somebody is failing on your team, it's probably something that you can influence. So own the results that that person's getting. So I think curiosity is the number one thing. And I think the other thing I like to say is just being a little bit more human. I think sometimes what I hear from managers and supervisors and leaders, and more managers and supervisors, is that they're worried about being too nice. And I think actually that's something you can be, hold people accountable, and you can be nice. You can be a human and hold people accountable. So don't think that managing means you're not human. So we have these humans that have been through, we're in the 3-year anniversary, right, of the greatest probably impact of our generation on work and life and choices. You know, look at the human first and ask yourself, how can I help that human? And when you do that, they're going to think, how can I help my boss be more successful? That's only 2. Is that good? 2 takeaways?
We know that's brilliant, actually, because curiosity, I think, underpins everything that you've talked about. Being curious about why they are the way they are, why you are the way you are, you know, look at your own internal biases too. And listening, being human. Yeah. And I think that is hard for, especially for new managers a lot of times, because they think, you know, well, I can't be their friend anymore.
Right.
So how can I be nice? But
And I have to know everything, but you don't.
you
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, Kathi, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much. Let me show people how they could get in touch with you if they have questions, if they want to ask you to come consult with them, if they want you to come speak to an organization they have. You can email Kathi at Kathi, Kathi, at kathyspeaks.com. And she has a website of the same name, Kathi, Kathi, speaks.com. So check her out at both places and show her some love, invite her to come speak. So thanks, Kathi.
No, thank you, Wendy. I love what you're doing here, and us boomers need people like you out leading the way so we can continue to contribute so meaningfully, you know, because we are the generation that's going to help support the newer generations to be able to do their best work. And so we have to show up, you know, and take all the advice and all the wisdom that you're sharing with all your guests so that we can help lift them up, because they are the future.
Yes, they are. Thank you, Kathi. Let me just remind all of you that are listening about the vitality assessment that you can download from the heyboomer.biz website, and how you can also, I told you I have the 2 new cohorts coming up in April for the What's Next coaching. So if you are struggling with figuring out what you're going to do next and how you're going to continue to contribute, because like Kathi said, we still have a big responsibility to the younger generation too, and contributing to our community. So check in with heyboomer.biz/coaching and schedule a complimentary call. Let's just chat about what the next chapter might look like for you. And finally, do not forget our sponsor, roadscholar.org/heyboomer. They love it when they see the /heyboomer because it lets them know that we're talking about them and that we're promoting them. So please go ahead and check out roadscholar.org/heyboomer. So next week, we're staying on an intergenerational theme next week, but next week we're going to be talking to 2 organizations who are passionate about climate action. The first one is an impact campaign called Can You Hear Us? And it was inspired by the I Am Greta, you know, Greta Thunberg, to ignite collective climate action. They mobilize intergenerational communities to reframe our relationship with each other and with the planet. And the other organization that will be joining us is called eldersclimateaction.org. And that's an organization of thousands of elder climate activists, all committed to a nonpartisan effort to end the climate crisis and build a just and sustainable future for our children, our grandchildren, and for all children. So it should be a really interesting conversation. And I always like to leave you with the belief that we can all live with passion, live with relevance, and live with courage. And remember that you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.